Traditional Sweet Recipes from Malta Volume 2, soon available at www.traditionalmaltesweets.com. Traditional Sweet Recipes, creating a small slice of Malta that feels like home.
Merħba lura fil-programm u fit-tieni taqsima ser niltaqgħu ma' Christian Zahra li għal numru ta' snin kien wieħed mill-iżgħar politikanti fix-xena federali Awstraljana.
I had an interesting upbringing, I think is probably the short answer.
Yeah.
And we grew up in the Latrobe Valley in Gippsland, and like many Maltese families in Australia, we grew up with pretty sort of humble background. Mum and Dad came with very little in Australia, and we really, we were from a classic Catholic working class Maltese family, and so we understood what it felt like to be on the margins of society. And growing up in a place like the Latrobe Valley, which is a very sort of industrial area, we also knew about, we were very sort of class conscious, I guess you could say, as well. But we knew about the haves and we knew about the have-nots, and we were aware, very much so I think growing up, that ours was a region in which we grew up where we'd suffer disadvantage. And I guess as a family growing up, whilst we like a lot of Maltese family, we put family first, and we always had food on the table. We were not a rich family. So we grew up with a real awareness, a social awareness, and that really propelled me into politics from an early age. And I joined the Labor Party when I was, I think, a teenager, maybe 18 or 19 years of age, got increasingly involved, and when the opportunity came up to contest the seat of McMillan for the Labor Party, I put my hand up and somehow managed to win the confidence of local ALP branch members, and the rest, as they say, is history.
So once you knew that this was the path you're kind of heading towards, what were some of the things you needed to navigate through, because you're going from a private life into immediately a public life?
Well, you're right, they are big changes. I think for me, the thing that I can see more clearly now than perhaps I could then was that I was moving increasingly into a greater awareness of all of society. And so I'd started off, if you like, understanding my own family, our own neighbourhood, our own parish, St Michael's Parish in Terrelgan, and then the broader town. And then in each of the jobs that I had, I learnt more about society, the one in which we lived, and other families and their experience as well, other towns and their stories. So by the time I'd got to 25, when I contested and won a seat in the federal parliament, I'd been on a sort of amazing learning curve from so many wonderful people who gave me their time, invested a lot in me, in teaching me everything they knew about politics, everything they knew about the Latrobe Valley and the other parts of the electorate of McMillan, and about the Labor Party. So by the time I actually had my chance to serve, I was pretty well equipped, and I feel really fortunate about that.
How much is the influence of maybe senior party elders or mentors in sort of coming into that role?
Really the most important political figure that I connected with was Paul Keating. And as a young student, I read nearly everything I could find about Paul Keating, and was so excited about his personal story and his leadership, and I found it inspirational. And one of the things that I remember reading about, and I can still remember it today, is that Paul Keating had grown up in a working class Catholic family in the western suburbs of Sydney.
Yeah.
And I remember, reading that and thinking, wow, someone like him can become Prime Minister of Australia. And for me, that was very affirming, because once I deeply understood that, I thought, well, maybe I can actually become something in Australia too.
What would be some of your highlights of the things that you're able to do that had meaning from the point of view of what you wanted to achieve in politics?
Well, I think if I sort of look back on my involvement in politics, and I guess other jobs that I've had outside of politics too, the thing that I've most been involved in, or that connects everything that I've done, is I've tried to champion those people who are at the margins. So whether it's Aboriginal people, whether it's people living in poverty in public housing, for example, or people in disadvantaged towns and regions, I've always lent my voice to their cause and my brain, if you like, to the efforts to improve their lives. And I guess one thing I can reflect on now is that, having worked, I guess, for 25 years I've worked, I guess, in full-time professional work now. I can look back and see that some people who come from, I guess, poorer backgrounds and, if you like, make it, they spend all their time saying everyone else should be able to make it too, and there's something wrong with them. But there's another group of people who think that they have been fortunate and that they owe some responsibility in their life to try and help other people who come from circumstances like their own to enjoy the opportunities in Australia too. And I've always connected with that, if you like, tradition. It's an Australian tradition, but I think there's a lot of Maltese in that tradition as well, at least in how I feel it, that if people want to improve their lives, we should try and help them. And that's something that I've tried to do with every role that I've been in.
U fl-aħħar taqsima Mark Avellino ikompli jitkellem ma' Christian Zahra dwar il-ħidma politika tiegħu fil-qasam indiġenu u reġjonali.
Your work with Indigenous and regional communities seems to be a large focus of what you're known for and what you've been doing during politics and post-politics. Could you tell us a little bit about that work specifically?
So I would say every bit of work that I've done and association I've had with Indigenous people has connected me more and more deeply to Australia. It's been one of those things that I just would never have known when I started in that type of work. I was lucky, I got a job as the CEO of an Aboriginal health and housing service in the Latrobe Valley when I was just 23. And I look back on it now and it was the beginning of something very important for me because I learnt so much more about Aboriginal people in that role, and in doing so I understood so much more about Australia. And I think as a migrant to Australia myself, what it gives you a feeling of is that when you connect with Australia, you're connecting with more than, if you like, just the contemporary society that exists today. You're actually connecting with something deeper, longer, and I would say, greater. And for me, that's been a real joy. It's helped me really connect completely with Australia through that involvement. So I've been very fortunate, I think, to have had that early association. I've maintained it, as you've said, in pretty much every role that I've been in. And most recently, I've had the privilege of serving as a Chief Executive Officer again in more recent times up in the Kimberley. And that's been a really enriching experience for me and my family. And I just encourage those people who might be watching your program to take the opportunity, if they ever get it, to go to some of those more remote parts of Australia and experience Indigenous culture there. Because whatever our experiences are of Indigenous culture, let's say in Victoria where we are today, there's something different again in those more remote locations, and experiencing that really helps us, I think, more deeply experience Australia.
So I imagine your family relocated up there for a period of time.
We did, yeah.
So how was it going from living in Melbourne or in Victoria and then going up to the Kimberley? Because that would blow my mind. It would be such a completely different cultural sort of thing. How did the kids and the family respond to going up there?
Well, you're right, it's so different. It's just, you're still in Australia, but only just. Yeah. You're really in an environment which is completely different. And I try and describe it to my friends here in Victoria, and I always find that I fail in trying to talk about what the Kimberley is like versus here in Victoria. There are so many issues of disadvantage that many Aboriginal people still are living in the Kimberley, and that's why we were there, to try and address or help the community address some of those issues. So you're confronted by that and you see that. So that's a really tough thing for families who go up there to experience. At the same time, it's an absolutely stunningly beautiful part of Australia with a climate which is completely different from here.
Christian, so all this work that you've done over the years in non-for-profits and with Indigenous culture and regional led to you being awarded an Order of Australia earlier this year. I know that with some of these things, they actually let you know earlier that you've won it, but you have to keep absolutely mum about it.
Yeah.
What was your response when you got the email or the phone calls?
Well, to be really honest with you, I felt overwhelmed about it. I was just really struck by it, and I felt so humbled. I couldn't believe it, to be honest. I couldn't believe it, and I felt very overwhelmed. And immediately I started to think about our family story in Australia, and we'd arrived with literally, the contents of my dad's suitcase was the beginning of our family story in Australia in 1950. So to imagine that we've gone on this journey of really being outsiders, at the margins, people with very little, and had to overcome a lot of the early Maltese, a lot of discrimination and all of those things, bigotry, all of those things, and that somehow, some way, one of us had ended up being made a member of the Order of Australia. I couldn't believe it, and I remembered all of those things. It was like in a moment, and I spoke to a lot of my friends about that feeling that somehow our small family, a small part of the story of Maltese migration in Australia, that somehow we'd arrived at this point where it's like we'd been accepted. That's how I felt that day.
Yeah, that's really nice. That makes me sort of want to ask the question of, so as a young kid growing up here and obviously having a rich family unit, and then when you go to Malta now, how do you console it in your head? Or how do you look at it?
Well, I feel very much Australian, and I feel very much Maltese, and I think that nearly every Maltese Australian would be able to connect with that at some level. So I know that probably when we were growing up, there was a real thing that you couldn't say that. There was a real sense that you couldn't be sort of true blue if you actually said, look, I love where I'm from and I'm proud of where I'm from. But I never bought into that. And I think what's happened is over time, society has sort of caught up with the idea that we enrich our society and we make people feel much more at home in Australia by recognising that part of who they are involves loving where they're from. I love Australia, and I love where I'm from, and I feel a very strong and powerful ongoing connection to Malta.
U dik l-intervista ġibna fit-tmiem mhux biss dan il-programm iżda wkoll dan il-5 staġun. Ma nistgħux nipproduċu programm bħal dan jekk ma jkollniex l-appoġġ finanzjarju mill-sponsors u minn hawn nirringrazzja lill-sponsors kollha tagħna li għamlu dan il-5 staġun possibbli. Ta' min jgħid li bosta minn dawn l-sponsors ilhom jappoġġjawna finanzjarjament sa mill-ewwel staġun u minn qalbina nirringrazzjawhom ta' dan. Nirringrazzja wkoll lilkom it-telespettaturi li għal dawn il-5 staġuni isseħibtu magħna u nispera li f'dawn it-12 ġimgħa li għaddew l-istejjer li wassalnielkom kienu ta' ispirazzjoni mhux biss għal kisbiet personali iżda wkoll għamlukom kburin min-nisel Malti. Nistedinkom sabiex tkomplu segwuna permezz tal-paġna tagħna fuq Facebook, kif ukoll permezz ta' YouTube fejn tistgħu terġgħu taraw il-5 staġuni ta' Maltese DownUnder. Jiena Marlin għan-nom tiegħi u ta' Mark nixtieqilkom is-saħħa. Maltese DownUnder thanks the Malta Tourism Authority, Mayfield's Business Advisors, MPD Steak Kitchen, Maltese Pastizzi Bar and Restaurant, First National Balkan Associates, Maltese Original Pastizzi Company, Smartline, and our bronze sponsors.